Hey guys, so we just had first weekend worth of regionals post Phantom Nightmare, and so as usual I wanted to provide an overview of the most played hand traps and staples among these topping deck lists. I basically went through almost 100 deck lists, so it took a lot of time, but hopefully you'll find it helpful. And as usual, I also really want to highlight the data source I used for this one was from ygoproduct.com, so really big shout out to Ren as well. I know Ivan also does kind of like his own thing in terms of hand traps and staples, so you can certainly go check that out as well. And as usual, definitely go check out my discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh! Singles as well as supplies. All of the details will be in the description below. Okay, so this is what the pie chart's looking like for the decks that were included for this video. So Fire King's definitely really dominant. I think the one surprise though is that Rescue Ace was pretty small. Although, you know, A, it was only 1 weekend worth of regionals, and B, you know, this is only looking at decks where the deck lists were available. So if we had all of those decks, perhaps this pie chart could look a little different. Voiceless Voice definitely looking pretty promising as well. Cashier is still hanging there, as well as Pure Snake Eye. Branded Despia is doing pretty well as well. And then also there's some other decks, let's say like Mannadium, Labrynth perhaps, they've been a bit of a disappointment. In terms of an overview of the hand traps played this time around, the median number of hand traps in the main deck was 10. Last time around this was 9, which was still considered high, so now it's even higher, which we kind of predicted, I suppose. I mean, I think there were a lot of hand traps that were gonna take place as you try to stop, you know, Fire Kings from going off, although some could argue perhaps you go with board breakers instead, because, you know, these Fire King deck lists are probably playing talents, as you'll see in a short bit. In terms of the side deck, the median number was 5, which dropped a little bit from the 6 last time I did this a couple of weeks ago based on the Latin American remote YCS. So those are kind of the trends we're seeing so far. In terms of the going second board breakers, in the main deck went down a little bit from 5 to 3. Of course, you know, they're playing a lot more hand traps. You have to kind of compensate somehow, and I guess this time around board breakers going down. You never know though, this sometimes tends to shift from between different kind of events. You know, you never know, you might see an increase in board breakers next time around I do this. And then in terms of side, about the same at about 6. Alright, so let's just cover the most played hand traps as usual, and we're going to start with Ash Blossom actually. I mean, I'm sure some people might have thought perhaps this would see a decline in play, especially because a lot of players have been talking about, you know, fire decks playing Hida and kind of extending through by reviving the opponent's Ash, for example. But it looks like they are still, it is still seeing a lot of play, and also it's seeing mostly main deck play as well. I'm sure some people may have thought that maybe it would see a bit more side deck play instead. Obviously, there's other decks, let's say like Branded Despia, Labrynth, where Ash is very strong against them. And Branded Despia is kind of hanging in there, but Labrynth, as I mentioned earlier, has been a bit of a disappointment in terms of representation. Next, we do have Droll, and this is, of course, another hand trap that we kind of expected would be quite dominant in this format. Now, in terms of whether you had to play either Nibiru or Droll and you had to choose between two, I've been seeing like a lot of conflicting arguments. I'm not really sure, realistically. Certainly let me know in the comments what you think. I mean, I guess it just really depends on the hand. I've Drolled them or Nibiru them. Sometimes I just play through it anyway, so I don't know. I guess it's pretty hand dependent. And of course, the big play of Mannadium probably explains the reason for like Mannadium's small representation so far, and after just 1 weekend worth of regionals. You do also have Imperm. This is, of course, if it's seeing play, then it's just primarily going to see main deck play. The great thing about Imperm, of course, it's not going to play into talents, which is kind of like the key concern right now with most of these Fire King decks playing talents to punish players for hand trapping them. And then, of course, we already spoke about Nibiru. It is, of course, really good, especially when paired with another hand trap. It's usually, if you had to choose, like one of the most impactful ones. And then, of course, we have Ghost Spell, which has been pretty popular recently because of Fire King, even before Phantom Nightmare, and of course, you know, with the kind of predicted rise of Labrynth because of transaction rollback, and Bell can be very strong against them, but as I said, they didn't have as much representation this time around. Ghost Spell, though, it's kind of interesting. I've done a lot of like historic trends with, you know, hand traps and how much I've been seeing play, and Ghost Spell tends to not really stick around in terms of, you know, being one of the most played hand traps. It's kind of interesting, but for the most part, I think for now it will stick around. Then we also have Veiler. I guess we also didn't see as much Rescue Ace this time around. Maybe that means not as much, you know, effect negation kind of hand traps like Emperor and Veiler, as well as Ghost Mourner as much as at least before, but you never know. Again, give it a little bit more time. Dimension Shifter. This one's interesting because, okay, sure, there are Cashier decks, Flunder decks, and sometimes maybe some other decks that don't play well optimally under Shifter, but they'll play it anyways just to have a chance against Fire King. But the interesting thing was there were at least like 4 or 5 Fire King decks themselves that were citing one shifter because of crossout. So technically, this is a bit misleading. It's actually seeing less play because those decks, those Fire King decks playing shifter on their side, they're not actually playing it, right? It's not like it's only for crossout target. And then you also have DD Crow. This has also been quite popular recently, just against, for the most part, Fire King. Getting rid of their whatever monsters in the graveyard is nice. I guess technically against Voiceless Voice, like their spell that can kind of like special summon another whatever ritual monster would also be pretty impactful to get rid of as well. And then you have Bis Shields, which is probably not going to see too much play right now, just because the predominant decks are just fire based. And then you also have Phantasme. This one I've also been kind of thinking of recently, just because, you know, those fire decks typically tend to link someone, of course. Of course, this is a card that you're almost never going to see main deck play anymore. It's not like Master Rule 4 anymore, but I do think that it can be pretty helpful in terms of, you know, shuffling your hand, especially, let's say, you want to get to that, like, Cosmic or Soul Release, for example, post-side. Alright, so let's just move on to the most common side deck staples, and we're starting with Cosmic Cyclone. Of course, this is all very largely influenced by the dominance of Fire King. Cosmic on the field spell to blow their field, or let's say even like, I guess, like anything Snake Eye relevant, you know, whatever's in the spell trap zone, their monster that they're trying to summon out, you can Cosmic that as well. And I guess in a new strategy like Voiceless Voice, or like Continuous Spell is pretty strong in terms of its protection, but it's also ability to search, so Cosmic can be pretty good against that as well, and realistically, probably good against most things. And, you know, some may even argue for main deck play, which of course a few lists actually did do that. You also have Call by the Grave. You know, it's a lot of hand traps right now, and on top of that, Fire Kings being able to banish and negate their effects going second can be pretty impactful as well. Then we do have talents that I spoke of. You know, it's gonna see a lot of play right now, especially with all the hand traps that are being played, and you know, Fire Kings can really punish you for you know, playing that hand trap. So this is kind of up for debate. Maybe it finally gets hit on the ban list somehow, but who knows. And then we also have Feather Duster. Not too much to say here, really generic. Then you have Evenly Match, which is, of course, a good card. Saw briefly a decline in play for a little bit, but now, since then, it really is seeing pretty good play. I mean, against Fire Kings, sure, you know, it doesn't destroy, so it's always nice. You do sacrifice the battle phase, and on top of that, Fire Kings have been known to really have really strong clapback game, so I'm not really sure how I feel about Evenly against that matchup. I mean, it's kind of nice. Sometimes you just don't have a choice anyways, but the fact that they are going to live, it's really dangerous, because they are going to be pretty strong coming back. And then you also have Lightning Storm, just generic board wipe removal. I mean, I guess we spoke about maybe Rescue Ace not seeing as much play this time around, and you know, so not as much like back row hate that you're getting rid of, but for the most part, pretty generic, good to have. Anti-Spell Fragrance, this is something I really don't like seeing. Of course, it is completely sided if it's seeing play at all. It does have an impact on the Fire King side of play, which of course you would also, you can find out more about that in terms of, you know, my survey video that I did of Fire King players in terms of, you know, the best hand traps, board breakers, floodgates against this strategy, so definitely go check that out. Anti-Spell also good against something like branded, any kind of branded deck, for example, and I'm sure a lot of most decks will kind of fold to Anti-Spell Fragrance. It's really annoying, especially when it's paired with something like an Omni Negate. And then you also have Super Poly, which has been quite popular lately. You know, the fires, again, you want to get rid of those monsters without destroying them. Super Poly is a great way to do that. And you also have Voiceless Voice, which is a new archetype that's, of course, making pretty good use of Super Poly as well. They have a pretty flexible extra deck space. So, and of course, you have a lot of branded decks right now, and they're always going to main deck Super Poly as well. And then you have Cashier Fenrir. Again, this is something where I'm not too comfortable including anymore, just because we do have a lot of Cashier decks right now, and this is kind of like just like their main engine card. But you know what, it's still pretty decent as a rather board wipe kind of card. But at the same time, I guess against like Fire Kings, this is probably just gonna get popped if this is sort of like your generic staple to try to out like whatever card. So perhaps not as good as before. And then you also have Thrust, of course, not seeing as much play as before. Certainly not nearly at the level of talents anymore. But you know what? Some decks are still running it, especially as a way to, let's say, search something like Evenly or Soul Release, depending on the matchup. So, and also going for us now, Different Dimension Ground is probably going to be a little bit more popular than before, perhaps, just against those fire strategies. So definitely worth considering. You also have Crossout. This is something that, because we're in a, you know, a really dominant fire format, like Crossout's going to go really hard against those cards specifically, on top of generic hand traps that this is kind of for the most part used for. But in the mirror matches, I'm sure this can be really impactful. And as I mentioned, some Fire King decks were even playing one shifter in the side, just have a target for Crossout as well. So you also have Kirkard Divincarnate, so this is of course a fire level 1, so they are able to search it off, you know, something like Snake Eye Ash, or I guess like the original Sinful Spells. Thanks to my friends for pointing that out for me. So it can be really strong. They're really just playing this at 1 in the side deck if they're playing it at all, so that is something that you should watch out for. So next, we already spoke about this, but Soul Release, from what I heard, it's a lot more impactful against like Fire King rather than like the pure Snake Eye version, but still can be pretty strong. It's a pretty old card too, so I think it's actually pretty cool that it's seeing this amount of play right now. And then you also have Summon Limit, which of course is a floodgate that's probably for the most part there for Fire Kings. But realistically, any deck is going to have a really hard time against something like Summon Limit. So hopefully another floodgate that gets at least put to 1 or something on the next list. And lastly, we also have droplets. I'm not really sure if there's really any key advantage of having droplets right now. I don't think it would really be enough from my understanding, but who knows. I was seen in 10 lists though. Now in terms of the most common generic extra deck monsters, this is what it's looking like. So SP wasn't seen as much play, but keep in mind this is only based on regional level events. So there's definitely going to be a lot of times where players will just not play SP just because they don't want to pay for it, which is totally understandable. If you look at this when I do YCS level analysis, then you for the most part see SP in almost every list, and the only time you're not seeing SP really is because that whatever deck just cannot actually play it in terms of, let's say, like some kind of restriction or something. So that is something to keep in mind. Some of the extra deck monsters definitely get influenced by Fire Kings. For example, something like Appaloosa. Technically, Link Karibo should have been on here as well. I decided not to include it because it is kind of generic, but at the same time, you know, it does require a deck with like whatever level 1. So not quite. So I decided to put Typhon in here instead, which actually didn't see as much play this time around. I mean, it's still pretty decent, I'm sure. But you know, otherwise, like Dark has also been pretty popular lately. Just again, being able to extend, like you have like the Diabell Star Witch or whatever, that is a Dark, and that usually is kind of like a key target. Lastly, in terms of tech choices, there weren't really that many. I mean, I did see like this one Foolish return, which I believe we saw this not that long ago, maybe within the last year or so, just kind of as a quick play card, being able to shuffle a card into the opponent's deck. So I guess it's kind of like another Call by the Grave without negating the effects, but perhaps it could be applicable. And then there were some time cards I was noticing. For example, some like these Fire King decks, they were playing Sprint and Scattershot in the side for like a time condition, or some were playing like Agav Dragon, I guess. So I guess there are some various ways to at least win in time as well. Anyways, guys, that was it for a breakdown and overview of the most played hand traps and staples for post Phantom Nightmare. Hopefully you found that helpful. Sorry if I kind of rushed through that. I am a bit crunched on time, but hopefully you still found that helpful nonetheless. A huge thanks to all of you for watching. Big thanks to my patrons as always for the continued support, and well, take care, guys.